I saw his car first, parked where it never should have been, the engine still warm in the early morning air. The house was quiet, too quiet, and something in my chest tightened before I even opened the door. Some truths announce themselves long before they are spoken. This story unfolds in a quiet suburban neighborhood where routines feel safe and familiar, and secrets hide behind drawn curtains. The narrator is a mother and wife, living a carefully built life centered around family, tradition, and trust. On the surface, nothing is broken, but beneath the calm, something has already begun to rot.
The sky was still undecided. Not night anymore, not quite morning. That soft gray hour when the world feels unfinished. I turned onto the street slower than usual, my foot easing off the gas without me thinking about it. The houses were quiet, lawns damp, porch lights still glowing like tired eyes. And then I saw the car. His car, parked where it did not belong. I hadn't planned to be early. That's what I told myself. The meeting ran short. The road was empty. The traffic lights changed just for me, green after green, like they wanted me to keep going. Still, I wasn't supposed to be here yet. Not this early. Not before the sun finished climbing. I pulled over across the street and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt loud. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven, fogging the windshield just a little. The house it was parked in looked ordinary. White siding, a blue door, a small flower bed with tired-looking roses. Nothing about it stood out. It wasn't dangerous or dark or hidden. It was the kind of place you wouldn't remember after driving past. And yet, his car sat in the driveway like it had always belonged there. I stared at it, taking in the small details. The scratch on the rear bumper from that parking lot incident years ago. The crooked license plate he kept saying he'd fix. The dashboard charm hanging crooked inside. Everything familiar. Everything wrong. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I had been married long enough to know life was full of explanations. Meetings ran late. Phones died. People helped other people. Sometimes cars broke down. Sometimes plans changed. Sometimes you were just tired. Still, my hands didn't move. They rested on the steering wheel, fingers tight, knuckles pale. I noticed then how cold they felt, even with the heater still warm from the drive. I rubbed my thumb against the cracked leather, a habit I'd had for years. A grounding thing. It didn't help. I checked the time. Too early. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing to explain why his car was here instead of at home, or at work, or anywhere that made sense. The street was waking up slowly. A dog barked somewhere far off. A garage door rattled open 2 houses down. The world kept moving, unaware that something inside me had stopped. I leaned forward, resting my forehead briefly against the steering wheel. Just for a second. I closed my eyes. This is nothing, I told myself. This is just your mind being cruel. When I looked up again, the car was still there. I noticed how close it was to the house. Pulled in neatly, carefully, like someone had taken their time parking it. Like they planned to stay. My heart started beating faster then. Not sharp panic. Something heavier. Like a warning bell rung too softly to ignore. I thought about driving away. Just backing out. Pretending I never saw it. Letting the morning continue as it was meant to. There was still time to choose that version of the day. Instead, I opened the door. The air outside was cold and smelled faintly of wet grass and distant coffee. My shoes felt too loud on the pavement. Every step toward the sidewalk felt deliberate, like I was crossing into something I couldn't undo. I stopped again, halfway there. Across the street, his car sat silent. Innocent looking. A witness that hadn't been asked if it wanted to be one. I laughed softly under my breath then. A small sound. Almost a scoff. The kind you make when you realize how dramatic your thoughts have become. You're imagining things, I thought. You're tired. That's all. Still, I didn't cross the street. What unsettled me most wasn't fear. It was recognition. Some part of me already knew this moment. Not the details. Not the reason. Just the feeling. That quiet tightening in the chest. That sense of being late to something important. I remembered other moments like this. Standing in grocery aisles, forgetting why I was there. Hearing his phone buzz late at night, and pretending not to notice. The way conversations had started ending sooner. Softer. None of those moments had meant anything on their own. Together, they leaned toward this driveway. I stayed where I was, staring at the house, searching the windows for movement. A shadow. A light flicking on. Any sign that would force me forward or send me away. Nothing moved. The curtains stayed still. The door remained closed. The street breathed quietly around me. My heart was racing now, fast enough that I could feel it in my throat. I placed a hand there, pressing gently, as if I could slow it down with touch alone. This is still explainable, I told myself. You don't know anything yet. But my body didn't believe me. I imagined knocking. The sound it would make. Solid. Final. I imagined his face when the door opened. Or someone else's face. Someone I knew. Someone I didn't. The thought made my stomach turn. I took a step back instead. Just one. Then another. Retreat felt safer than truth. I returned to my car and sat inside with the door closed, the glass separating me from the world again. The engine stayed off. The radio stayed silent. I watched the house a little longer. Watched the sky shift from gray to pale gold. Watched the street wake up without noticing me. Eventually, I started the car. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of his car in the mirror. Smaller now. Still wrong. My heart was still racing. And I realized then, it had started before I ever turned onto that street. Something inside me had already known where this day was going. I just hadn't wanted to follow it yet.
The door closed behind me with a sound that felt louder than it should have been. Not a slam. Just a soft click. The kind of sound that tells you there's no one left to stop you. The air inside the house was cool and faintly sweet, like rain that had settled into fabric overnight. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob, listening. The house breathed quietly around me. And then I saw the shoes. They were placed neatly by the door, toes aligned, careful. One pair was his. I knew them without looking twice. The scuffed brown loafers he wore when he wanted to look presentable but comfortable. The ones I'd bought him years ago, back when we still shopped together without rushing. The leather had softened the way old things do, molded by time and habit. Beside them sat another pair. Smaller, lighter. Shoes that didn't belong to this house. They were clean, almost delicate, with thin straps and a faint shine that caught the early light slipping through the window. There was something intentional about the way they were placed. Like someone wanted them to be seen, or like someone believed they would not be. I didn't move right away. The house felt different with shoes like that inside it. Like a room after furniture has been rearranged, just slightly enough to confuse your memory. I inhaled again, slower this time, and noticed the scent more clearly. Perfume. Not mine. It wasn't heavy, just a soft trace. Something floral and warm, clinging to the quiet like it had nowhere else to go. It mixed with the smell of damp air and old wood, turning the familiar into something unsettled. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen, steady and low. The wall clock ticked. Each second landed too sharply, like it wanted my attention. I stepped out of my shoes and placed them where they always went. The floor was cold beneath my feet. I felt it through my socks, grounding and unkind. This is still explainable, I told myself. Shoes can mean many things. I took one step forward. The floor creaked softly, the way it always had. A sound I'd stopped noticing years ago. Today it felt like a voice. Paused, listening. Nothing else moved. No footsteps. No laughter. No doors closing. Just the refrigerator. The clock. My breathing. I let my fingers trail along the edge of the console table as I passed it. The wood felt familiar, worn smooth by years of keys and mail and grocery lists. A stack of envelopes sat untouched, yesterday's mail still unopened. Life apparently had continued while I was gone. I moved farther into the house, every step careful, like I might disturb something fragile. The perfume followed me, faint but persistent. It lingered near the hallway, stronger there, as if the walls themselves had absorbed it. I glanced toward the living room. The couch cushions were slightly shifted. Not messy, just used. A throw blanket lay folded too neatly over the armrest, the way someone folds things when they want to leave no trace. I swallowed. My heart had started to beat faster again, the sound of it filling my ears. I pressed my lips together, feeling the dryness there. My mouth tasted like metal, like fear. I wanted to call out his name. I didn't. Somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked. Or maybe it was the pipes. The sound echoed anyway, crawling along my spine. I stood still, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Each one felt louder than the last. As I reached the hallway, I noticed something else. Coat. Not his. Not mine. It hung on the hook by the bedroom door. Light fabric draped carelessly, as if it had been removed in a hurry. The sleeve brushed the wall, swaying slightly in the air from my passing. I stared at it, my mind slow to accept what my eyes were offering. I knew that coat. I'd seen it before. Family dinners. Celebrations. Hanging on the back of a chair while laughter filled the room. My stomach dropped. The realization didn't crash into me all at once. It arrived gently, cruelly, like dawn light creeping across a floor you didn't want to see. I rested my hand against the wall to steady myself. The paint felt cool and solid beneath my palm. I focused on that sensation, afraid of what might happen if I didn't. This is not what it looks like, I thought. Can't be. But the house felt different now. Charged. Like it was holding its breath with me. The hallway seemed longer than it ever had. The door at the end, closed, waited quietly. Too quietly. I took another step. Then another. My legs felt heavy, like they were moving through water. My ears rang softly, the edges of sound blurring. I wondered briefly if this was how people felt right before bad news, before the world split into before and after. I stopped again, just feet from the door. On the other side there were sounds. Low. Indistinct. Murmur. A soft laugh that didn't belong to me. I recognized it anyway. I didn't open the door yet. Instead, I looked back down the hallway toward the front of the house. Toward the shoes by the door. The ones that had greeted me like a warning I almost ignored. The clock kept ticking. The refrigerator kept humming. The house kept pretending this was just another morning. I stood there, suspended between what I knew and what I was about to see. Between memory and truth. My hand hovered inches from the doorknob. Cold. Waiting. And for the first time since I stepped inside, I understood something clearly. Once that door opened, nothing in this house would ever feel quiet again. The door was closed. Not slammed. Not locked with anger. Just closed, quietly, deliberately. The hallway light flickered once, then steadied, casting a thin yellow line beneath the door. It rested there like a boundary, like a warning. I stood still, holding my breath, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere inside that room, life was happening without me. And the silence between us felt heavier than any sound. I don't remember how long I stood there. Time did something strange in that hallway. Stretched, folded in on itself. The air felt warmer near the door, thick with the smell of fabric and skin and something sweet I couldn't name. The perfume was stronger here, no longer just a trace. Had weight. This was our hallway. The one we walked down every night. The one where we argued quietly so the kids wouldn't hear. The framed photos along the wall watched me now. Birthdays. Graduations. A beach trip where the sun had burned our shoulders and we laughed about it later. His arm always around me. My head leaning into his chest. I wondered if the walls remembered those days. If they felt embarrassed for me. From inside the room came a sound. Low voices muffled by the door. Not words I could make out. Just the rhythm of conversation. Familiar. Comfortable. Then a laugh. Unrestrained. It didn't belong to my world. My chest tightened. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, grounding myself. I noticed how dry my lips felt. How my hands had started to tremble, just slightly. This is still your house, I told myself. You have a right to be here. The thought didn't bring comfort. It only sharpened the ache. I took a step closer. The carpet muted my movement, but the floor beneath it creaked anyway, the way old houses do when they sense hesitation. I stopped again, listening for a reaction on the other side. Nothing changed. The voices continued. Unaware. I raised my hand slowly, as if the door might recoil from my touch. My fingers hovered inches from the wood. I could see the faint scratches near the handle, marks from years of careless rings and keys. We had painted this door together once. A Sunday afternoon project. He had gotten paint on his hair. I laughed and told him to leave it. It looked like wisdom. I wondered if any of that mattered now. My palm pressed against the door. It was warm. That was what startled me most. Not cold. Not distant. Warm with the heat of bodies and breath and closeness. I felt a faint vibration through the wood like a pulse. Life happening inches away from my skin. Closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, memories rushed in without asking permission. Holiday dinners where I stayed up too late washing dishes. Nights when he held my hand in the dark, thumb brushing circles into my knuckles. Promises made quietly, because we believed quiet meant forever. I swallowed hard. The laughter came again. Softer this time. Intimate. I felt something inside me begin to fracture. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a slow splitting like ice forming cracks before it breaks. I leaned my forehead against the door. The wood was solid. Unmoving. It didn't care about my history or my marriage or my name. It held its position with quiet certainty. On the other side someone shifted. Fabric rustled. A voice lowered. I realized then that whatever was happening in that room had been happening long before this moment. Before the shoes. Before the driveway. Before my early arrival. I was not interrupting anything. I was arriving late. That understanding settled into me with a strange calm. The racing of my heart slowed, replaced by something heavier. Resignation, maybe. Or clarity. I pulled my hand away and studied it, as if it belonged to someone else. It looked the same. Wedding ring still in place. Skin still warm. But it felt different. I thought about turning back. About leaving quietly. About preserving this last thin moment where I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Where I could still pretend. The door remained closed. Waiting. I reached for the handle. It didn't turn. The click was soft, but it echoed inside me like a verdict. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. Not from surprise, but from confirmation. This had been chosen. Deliberately. Thought through. I pictured him locking it. The small, unconscious movement of his hand. The decision not to hear me. Something inside me went very still. I stood there a moment longer, staring at the door like it might open on its own. Like it might apologize. Didn't. The laughter inside faded into murmurs. The house resumed its quiet hum, as if this were all perfectly ordinary. I turned away. The hallway felt longer now. Colder. The photos on the wall blurred as I passed them, their smiles suddenly distant, unreal. When I reached the end, I paused and looked back one last time at the closed door. At the thin line of light beneath it. I realized then that some doors don't need to be open to change everything. Some truths are loud enough, even when they stay locked. The door opened without warning. Not all the way. Just enough. Light spilled into the hallway, warm and wrong, cutting across my feet like it had been waiting for me. For a moment no one spoke. The house seemed to inhale sharply, as if it too was surprised by what it had revealed. I stood there, rooted to the floor, watching the world rearrange itself in front of me. He was the first thing I saw. My husband. His hair was slightly out of place, the way it got when he'd run his hand through it too many times. His shirt wasn't tucked in properly. He looked unfinished. Like a thought interrupted halfway through. He didn't look angry. He didn't look guilty. He looked startled. As if I were the one who didn't belong there. For a second that almost made me laugh. The room behind him felt unfamiliar, though it held our furniture, our bed, our curtains. The lamp on the nightstand glowed softly, casting shadows that didn't make sense. The air was warmer here, thicker, heavy with the smell of skin and that same unfamiliar perfume. I noticed small things first. The way his shoulders stiffened. The way his mouth opened, then closed again like he couldn't find the right word quickly enough. My ears rang softly. A dull, distant sound like standing too close to a bell. I waited for him to say my name. He didn't. Then I saw her. She stood just behind him, partially hidden, as if the doorframe might protect her. Her hair was loose, falling around her shoulders in a way I had never seen before. Her face looked bare, younger, stripped of the careful polish she usually wore when she came over for dinner. She was caught mid-breath. Her eyes met mine for just a second before dropping to the floor. She didn't look at me again. I recognized the dress. I had complimented her on it once. Told her the color suited her. She had smiled then, bright and grateful. Now she held the fabric at her side, fingers clenched tightly, knuckles white. No one moved. The silence pressed down on us, thick and unbearable. It filled every corner of the room, settling into places words could not reach. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, slow and deliberate, as if my body had decided to take control while my mind struggled to keep up. This is not happening, I thought. This is a mistake. A misunderstanding. But the way they stood told a different story. They were close. Too close. Their bodies angled toward each other without thinking, like people who had already chosen sides. I realized then that I was the only one standing alone. He finally spoke. Name. Softly. Carefully. As if volume might determine the damage. I didn't answer. I looked at her instead. At the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller. At the faint flush rising in her cheeks. She looked ashamed but not surprised. That was the part that broke something open inside me. I had watched her grow into this family. Watched her laugh at our table. Watched her lean forward eagerly when my son talked about the future. I had imagined her standing beside him. Imagined grandchildren. Imagined years unfolding gently. And now she stood in my bedroom, unable to meet my eyes. I searched her face for something. Regret, confusion, fear. I found fragments of all three, but no answers. How did this happen? Yes. My voice sounded steady. That surprised me. No one answered right away. My husband shifted his weight, glancing back at her as if checking for permission. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean, she started, then stopped. Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together, shaking her head slightly, like she could erase the moment by refusing to finish the sentence. I felt something settle deep in my chest then. Not rage. Not even grief. Recognition. This wasn't a moment that had gotten away from them. This wasn't confusion or accident. It was something they had stepped into quietly, together, believing they had time. I had simply arrived too early. No one touched me. No one tried to stop me as I stepped back into the hallway. The light from the bedroom faded as the door closed again. Slower this time, softer. I stood there alone, listening to the sound of it clicking shut. The house returned to its familiar rhythm. The hum of electricity. The distant tick of the clock. Ordinary sounds, carrying on as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. As I turned away, one thought followed me, quiet and unrelenting. The worst part wasn't what I had seen. It was knowing. They had already imagined a world. Where I didn't. The words came before the door fully closed. As if they were afraid of being trapped inside with the truth. I can explain. I swear it's not what you think. The room felt smaller suddenly. The air thicker. I stayed where I was, just inside the doorway, listening to the explanations rush past me like water spilling from a cracked glass. Too fast. Too eager. And already, something inside me knew. Truth never arrives this breathless. I sat down on the edge of the chair by the window, the one we never used anymore. The cushion sighed under my weight. Outside, the morning had grown brighter, the sun pressing gently against the curtains as if it didn't understand what it was interrupting. They stood in front of me. Not together. But not apart either. My husband kept smoothing his shirt, a nervous habit from years ago, back when stress still meant something small. His eyes flicked between my face and the floor, never settling. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, shoulders curled inward like she was cold. No one offered me water. No one asked if I wanted to sit somewhere else. They just talked. The words tumbled over each other, piling up until they lost their shape. Misunderstanding. Timing. Mistake. A moment that went too far. A situation taken out of context. Nothing happened, he said. Not really, she added. I nodded slowly, not because I believed them but because I was listening to something else. The space between their sentences. The way they avoided certain details. The way their eyes darted when silence lingered too long. The house listened with me. He tried again. "It just happened," he said, voice low, careful. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." That was when I looked up. "Find out what?" he asked. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the end of a long hallway. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But I saw it. That pause was louder than any confession. She shifted her weight, biting her lip. Her gaze stayed fixed on the carpet, tracing invisible patterns in the fibers. I wondered how many times she'd stood like this before. Practicing regret. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I studied her face. The familiar lines. The softness I had once trusted. She looked afraid, but fear, I was learning, could mean many things. Afraid of consequences. Afraid of being seen clearly. Afraid of losing something she hadn't been meant to have. "You didn't mean to," I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth. He reached out then, stopping himself halfway. His hand hovering awkwardly in the air. "Please," he said. "You have to understand." Understand what? That love had rules until it didn't. That loyalty bent when no one was watching. I stayed quiet. Silence has a way of inviting truth, or exposing the lack of it. They filled the quiet quickly. Too quickly. Every gap was patched with another explanation. Another reason. Another excuse shaped like concern. I watched them carefully now, less as a wife and more as someone witnessing a performance. Their stories didn't quite line up. The timeline shifted depending on who spoke. Dates blurred. Details softened. The same moments described differently, like they were trying to see which version I would accept. I felt it then, a slow, sinking weight in my stomach. These weren't the first lies. They were practiced. I remembered all the times my questions had been answered too smoothly. The nights he came home late with the same tired smile. The way she had grown more comfortable in our home, moving through rooms like she belonged to them. I had mistaken familiarity for innocence. "Nothing happened," he said again. I looked at the bed behind them. The lamp still on. The sheets not quite right. Something had happened. Even if it wasn't what they feared I meant. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the cool would press into my spine. My body felt strangely calm, as if it had stepped away from the moment to protect itself. "You're scared," I said softly. They both looked at me then. Not with relief. With alarm. That was my answer. Fear doesn't come from misunderstanding. It comes from knowing exactly what you've done, and wondering how much of it has already been seen. Eventually the words ran out. The room settled into a heavy stillness, broken only by the faint sound of a car passing outside. Life apparently was still happening somewhere else. I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady beneath me, even if my heart did not. "I need air," I said. No one stopped me. As I walked toward the door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked older somehow. Not weaker. Just clearer. Behind me, I heard him say my name again. I didn't turn around. 'Cause I understood something now. The first lie is never the most painful one. It's the one that teaches you how many more there might be. The road home looked the same as it always had. Gray pavement. Yellow lines. Trees standing quietly on either side like they had nothing to say. I drove with the windows down, even though the air was cold. I needed to feel something real against my skin. The hum of the tires followed me, steady and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I kept my eyes on the road, afraid that if I looked anywhere else, I might finally fall apart. I don't remember leaving the house. I remember the door opening, the light outside, and then the car moving beneath me like it knew the way without asking. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel now, no longer shaking. That scared me more than the fear had. Calm felt unfamiliar, earned the wrong way. The neighborhood slipped past in soft focus. Lawns trimmed too neatly. Trash cans lined up like obedient soldiers. Someone waved as I passed. A polite stranger who didn't know my world had just cracked open. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked unchanged. Same eyes, same mouth. But something behind them had shifted. Like a room after furniture has been removed. Still recognizable, but hollowed out. That was when the memories began. Not all at once. One at a time. Late nights he explained away with tired smiles. Work ran long, he'd said, loosening his tie. I had believed him because believing was easier than imagining anything else. Sudden kindness. Flowers for no reason. Compliments delivered softly. Like apologies I didn't yet understand. Awkward silences at family gatherings. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Her laugh arriving a beat too late, like she was listening for cues. I had noticed these things. I had chosen not to name them. The light turned green. I drove on. Each mile unlocked another memory. They rearranged themselves inside me, finding new meaning without asking permission. Moments I had dismissed now glowed too brightly to ignore. I remembered the night he stayed up late doing dishes, even though it wasn't his turn. I'd thanked him, kissed his cheek. He had smiled, but not with his eyes. I remembered how she had stopped meeting my gaze sometimes, just briefly, like eye contact had become dangerous. I remembered the way my son talked about the future, his voice full and hopeful, and how she would nod a little too eagerly, like she was overcompensating for something unspoken. At the time I had blamed stress, youth, nerves. Now, each memory settled into place like a piece of a picture I didn't want to finish. The radio was still off. The silence in the car felt intentional, sacred even. I let it stretch. My chest tightened, not with pain exactly, but with something heavier. The sense of having been present for my own undoing. I had been there the whole time. Cooking meals, folding laundry, laughing at the table. All while something else grew quietly beneath the surface. I pulled into a gas station and parked without needing fuel. The engine idled softly. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing in the familiar smell of dust and old upholstery. "How long?" I whispered. The car didn't answer. I sat there longer than I meant to. People came and went around me, their lives moving forward with purpose. A woman buckled her child into the back seat. A man wiped his windshield with a rag. Normal moments, happening uninterrupted. I wondered how many times I had stood smiling beside them while carrying a secret I didn't yet know I was keeping. That was the cruelest part. Not the betrayal itself, but the way it rewrote everything that came before it. Memories I once held gently now felt contaminated. Like photographs soaked in water. Colors bleeding into each other until nothing stayed clear. I thought about trust. How quietly it lives. How easily it is spent without noticing. I thought about all the times I had defended them. Him, her, without being asked. How loyalty had come naturally to me like breathing. Felt foolish then. Not stupid. Just tender. Open in a world that had learned to close its doors. The realization arrived softly, but it stayed. This hadn't started yesterday, or last week, or even last month. It had taken root slowly, patiently, growing in the spaces where I wasn't looking. I straightened in my seat, wiping my eyes with the heel of my hand. No tears fell. Just a sting. A warning. I started the car again. By the time I reached home, the sky had shifted. Clouds hung low and heavy, the color of unsaid things. I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking sound it made as it cooled. The house stood quietly in front of me. Familiar. Changed. I knew now that nothing inside it was untouched by what I had learned. Even the walls carried echoes I could no longer ignore. I opened the door and stepped out slowly. As I walked toward the house, one thought stayed with me, steady and unrelenting. The past doesn't change until the truth walks back through it. And now that it had, I didn't know what else it might reveal. The room smelled like dust and old paper. Quiet, forgotten smell. The kind that settles when doors stay closed too long. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the mattress dipping under my weight the way it used to when I woke him for school. Morning light slipped through the blinds in thin lines, cutting across faded posters and shelves that hadn't been touched in years. The house felt far away in here. Like this room had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. This was his room. Still was, in some way. The trophies lined the shelf above the desk, plastic gold dulled by time. A spelling bee he barely remembered winning. I reached out and ran my finger along one of them, brushing away a thin layer of dust. My nail left a clean line behind, too visible. On the wall, posters curled at the corners. Bands he no longer listened to. Movies he'd outgrown. I remembered helping him tape them up, my hands steady while his shook with excitement. The bedspread was neatly tucked, just as I'd left it the last time he visited. A habit I couldn't seem to break, keeping things ready for a boy who no longer lived here full-time. I sat very still, afraid that if I moved too much, the weight in my chest might finally spill over. Up until now, the pain had stayed contained, controlled, something I could manage by focusing on details. Words. But here, surrounded by the evidence of his growing up, it shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. I picked up a framed photo from the desk. He was younger in it, maybe 10. Grinning, 2 front teeth missing. His arms slung around my shoulders like he was already learning how to protect me. We were standing in the backyard, the grass uneven beneath our feet, the sun too bright for the camera. I remembered that day. He had fallen off his bike earlier and scraped his knee, cried hard, loud, then wiped his tears quickly, embarrassed by them. I had held his face in my hands and told him it was okay to hurt. "It doesn't make you weak," I'd said. "It means you feel." I wondered if anyone had told him that lately. I imagined him now, planning a future that felt solid. A marriage built on trust. A life he believed was safe because the people closest to him had promised to be. My throat tightened. The betrayal deepened here, taking on a new shape. Sharper. Heavier. As a wife I had been hurt. As a mother I was undone. I looked around the room again, seeing it differently now. This space had held his fears, his dreams, his disappointments. It had watched him grow into someone ready to build a life of his own. And somewhere along the way, that life had been quietly sabotaged. I pressed my lips together, feeling the sting behind my eyes. I refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still clung faintly, barely visible in the daylight. I remembered sticking them up years ago, climbing on a chair while he directed me from below. "More to the left," he'd said. "No, the other left." I smiled despite myself. Then the smile faded. How does a parent carry this kind of truth? The question settled into me, heavy and unresolved. I imagined telling him, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, watching his face change as the words reached him. The confusion first, then the disbelief, then the slow, painful understanding. I imagined his silence afterward. The kind that pulls inward instead of pushing out. The kind I knew too well. I wondered if I could spare him that. I wondered if sparing him would cost him more in the end. Parents are meant to protect their children. From danger. From harm. From heartbreak when they can. But what do you do when the danger comes from inside the family? I rolled onto my side, clutching the pillow to my chest. It smelled faintly of detergent and something older. Him maybe. Or memory. Felt small then. Uncertain. Like I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Whatever I chose next would shape him. Would echo into his future in ways I couldn't predict. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on me until it was hard to breathe. I sat up slowly and placed the photo back on the desk, careful to set it exactly where it had been. I smoothed the bedspread with my hands, straightening a wrinkle that didn't matter. At the door I paused and looked back once more. The trophies stayed silent. The posters didn't curl any further. The room held its secrets gently. I turned off the light and closed the door behind me, leaving the space untouched. As I walked away, one truth followed me, steady and unkind. Some pain belongs to us alone. But some truths refuse to stay contained. And soon I would have to decide whether love meant protecting him from the truth, or trusting him to survive it. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. Each second stretched, thin and sharp, cutting into the silence between us. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded like he was waiting for permission to speak. The overhead light hummed softly, casting shadows under his eyes that made him look older, tired. The house felt smaller then, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I remember thinking, once the truth starts, there's no way to stop it halfway. It was late afternoon, that in-between hour when daylight loses its confidence. The sun hovered low, spilling pale gold across the counter where crumbs still sat from lunch no one had finished. I had asked the question again, not loudly, not angrily, just the same way I had before, careful and plain. You're not telling me everything. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the table, tracing a dark ring left by his coffee mug. He rubbed at it with his thumb over and over, as if he could erase it if he tried hard enough. Waited. I had learned how to wait in this marriage. Learned how silence could be used like furniture, something heavy you work around instead of moving. The air between us felt thick. Not charged, just tired. When he finally looked up, his mouth opened, then closed again. False start. His jaw tightened, then loosened. He exhaled slowly through his nose. That was when I knew. Whatever he was about to say had been sitting inside him for a long time. It didn't just happen, he said. His voice was quiet, even, almost careful. I didn't interrupt. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. The chair beneath me creaked softly, like it remembered other conversations. Better ones. He cleared his throat. It started small. That word, small, hung in the air, fragile and dishonest. He talked about conversations that lingered too long. About checking in just to see how she was doing. About moments that felt harmless because they didn't leave marks right away. She needed someone, he said. I nodded once slowly. Not in agreement. Just to keep him going. He spoke in pieces. Fragments. Never looking at me for too long. His eyes drifted to the window, the clock, the floor. Anywhere but my face. Time stretched. The confession came out the way old things do. Stiff at first, then loosening with each word. He admitted to patterns. Repetition. Choices made again and again, even when he knew better. It wasn't a fall. It was a walk. I noticed the way his shoulders dropped as he spoke, like he was unloading something he'd been carrying too long. I wondered how long he'd rehearsed this. How many nights he'd lain awake deciding what version of the truth I deserved. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. When he finally stopped talking, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with everything he hadn't said, and everything I now understood. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was intention stretched over time. I stared at him, really looked this time. At the familiar lines of his face. The man I had trusted to protect our family. To guard the edges of our lives with care. My voice came out softer than I expected. How long? He hesitated. Just a beat too long. Long enough, he said. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not shattered. Just moved. Like furniture being rearranged without asking. I thought about all the small moments that had felt off. The late nights. The distracted smiles. The way he'd flinched when my son talked about his future so freely. So confidently. It all settled into place with a dull finality. Betrayal, I realized, is rarely just one thing. It's a collection. Choices. Of silences. Of chances to stop that were quietly ignored. I felt no urge to scream. No dramatic rush of anger. Just a deep, aching clarity. I asked you before, I said. And you told me nothing was wrong. He nodded. I know. That was it. No defense. No excuse left to offer. The truth had finished its work. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. The sound felt too loud in the stillness. He didn't move. Didn't reach for me. Just watched as I crossed the kitchen. At the sink, I ran the tap and held my hands under the water, letting it rush over my skin. It was colder than I expected. I welcomed the sting. Behind me, the clock kept ticking. I didn't turn around. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked. The sound traveled down the hallway, settling into corners I knew too well. When I finally shut off the water, I stayed there, staring out the window at a sky that had begun to dim. The truth was out now. Not loud, not explosive, just present. And as I stood there, drying my hands on a towel worn thin by years of use, one question lingered. Quiet, unresolved and waiting. Once the truth is spoken, what are you supposed to do with what's left? The hallway light was still on when I stopped outside his door. A thin line of yellow slipped out from beneath it, stretching across the floor like a quiet invitation. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. Inside, my son shifted in his sleep. The soft thud of a pillow being turned. The steady rhythm of breathing that had once fit perfectly against my shoulder. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. The house held its breath with me. It was close to midnight, the hour when thoughts stop pretending to be reasonable. I leaned against the wall, the paint cool through my sweater, and let my head rest back. I had rehearsed the words all evening. Simple ones, careful ones, the kind meant to protect. I imagined sitting on the edge of his bed, smoothing the blanket the way I used to when he was small. I imagined his face when I said his name in that soft, serious way mothers reserve for moments that change things. But every version ended the same. My voice breaking. His eyes searching mine. Something precious cracking between us. Earlier at dinner, he'd talked about school without noticing how I barely touched my food. He laughed at something on his phone, head tipped back, free and unburdened. I watched him the way you watch a flame you're afraid to breathe on. How do you hand a child a truth that can't be taken back? The clock down the hall chimed once. Then again. Time kept moving whether I was ready or not. I pushed his door open just enough to see inside. His room looked the same as it always had. Posters curling slightly at the corners, a stack of books on the desk, shoes kicked off without care. The familiar mess of a life still in motion. I took one step in, then another. The floor creaked softly under my weight. He stirred but didn't wake. I froze, heart pounding too loud for the quiet. On his desk sat a photo frame I didn't remember placing there. The three of us years ago. Sunlight in our eyes. Arms slung easily around shoulders. A day before any of this had names. I picked it up, thumb brushing the glass. I tried the words again in my head. There's something you need to know. This isn't your fault. I love you more than. None of them survived the silence of the room. I sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to disturb him. His blanket rose and fell. Steady. Trusting. My throat tightened. I realized then that telling the truth wasn't just about honesty. It was about choosing the moment you're willing to let your child see the world tilt. And I wasn't ready. I stood up slowly, easing away from the bed as if distance might soften what I was carrying. The door I stopped. Silence wrapped itself around me. Heavy but familiar. I had lived with it for years without naming it. This time it felt different. Sharper. More deliberate. Silence, I understood, isn't empty. It's full of choices. I told myself I was protecting him. That I needed time. That tomorrow would be better. That I'd be stronger then. But beneath all that careful reasoning was fear. Fear of his disappointment. Fear of being the one to break the image of his father. Fear of hearing my own voice tremble and knowing I couldn't fix what followed. I closed the door gently, the latch clicking into place with a finality that made my chest ache. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall again, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor like I used to when he was a baby and wouldn't stop crying. Back then, I believed every tear could be solved if I held him long enough. Now I wasn't so sure. Silence felt safer. But it burned all the same. I returned to my bedroom alone. The bed felt too wide, the sheets cool where someone should have been. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the plaster as the house settled around me. Down the hall, my son slept on unaware. Oh, touch. I wondered how many nights I could carry this before it changed shape inside me. Before silence stopped being protection and became something else entirely. The clock ticked on. Tomorrow hovered just out of reach. And as sleep finally crept in, one thought stayed with me. Quiet, persistent, and unresolved. Silence can keep you safe for a while. But how long before it starts telling its own lies? The table was already set when I walked into the dining room. Plates aligned. Napkins folded into careful squares. A vase of flowers beginning to droop, their petals curling inward like they'd been waiting too long. The house smelled like roasted chicken and something sweet burning at the edges. Familiar. The kind of smell that usually meant nothing bad was allowed to happen. I stood there with my hands resting on the back of a chair, listening to voices gather in the other room. Laughter brushed the walls. Light. And somewhere beneath it all, I felt a low hum. A warning my body understood before my mind did. We hadn't all been together since before everything cracked open. Days had passed. Long ones. Quiet ones. The kind where you pretend routine still holds. I had told myself I wouldn't do it today. Not like this. I stirred pots. I wiped counters already clean. I checked the oven clock twice in 5 minutes. My hands kept moving because stillness felt dangerous. When they arrived, I hugged who needed hugging. Smiled when smiling was expected. I listened to updates about work, school, traffic. All the small talk that builds a bridge over uncomfortable truths. My son sat across from me at the table, tapping his foot against the chair leg. Nervous energy. Or maybe just youth. He met my eyes once and smiled quick and easy. I looked away first. My husband sat beside him, posture stiff, hands folded too neatly. He spoke only when spoken to. His voice careful, measured. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Forks clinking, glasses touching, the clock ticking too close to my ear. I felt like I was holding my breath underwater, waiting to see how long before something inside me gave out. Dinner moved forward the way it always had. Questions passed around the table. Answers given without depth. No one lingered too long on anything real. Then it happened. Look. Not a word. Not a gesture. Just a brief glance between two people who had practiced not being seen. I caught it in the corner of my eye. Flicker. Gone too fast to call out. But my body reacted before I could stop it. My hand tightened around my fork. My chest pulled inward, sharp and sudden. The room tilted just enough to let the truth slide loose. I watched my son talking unaware. His hands moved as he spoke. The way they always had. Trusting. Something in me broke then. Not loudly. Not all at once. It felt like a hairline fracture spreading quietly through glass. Someone asked me a question. I don't remember what it was. My name hung in the air waiting. I opened my mouth. And instead of the safe answer, the rehearsed one. The truth stepped forward. I can't do this anymore. The words were soft. Almost polite. But they stopped the room cold. Every face turned toward me. Chairs stilled. Forks hovered midair. I felt my heart beating in my throat. My hands were shaking now. I didn't try to stop them. I looked at my husband. He didn't look back. That was answer enough. I've been carrying something, I said. And I thought I could protect everyone by staying quiet. My voice didn't rise. Thinned. Like thread pulled too tight. I was wrong. Silence pressed in from all sides. Unforgiving. My son frowned slightly. Confused. Concerned. He leaned forward in his chair. Mom, he said. That one word nearly ended me. I closed my eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to remember his first steps. His laugh as a child. The way he used to crawl into our bed after bad dreams. Then I spoke. Not every detail. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to change the shape of the room forever. The truth fell between us like something dropped and broken. You could almost hear it scatter. My husband finally looked up. His face pale. Me. He didn't speak. No one did. My son's smile disappeared slowly, like a light being turned down too far. He looked from me to his father and back again, searching for the version of this that made sense. What? He whispered. I wanted to take it back then. Every word. Every breath. But truth doesn't move backward. No one finished their food. Chairs scraped softly as people stood. Someone touched my arm and then thought better of it. My son left the table without a word. His footsteps heavy on the stairs. I stayed where I was, staring at the untouched plate in front of me. The flowers on the table had lost another petal. It lay beside my napkin, unnoticed by anyone else. Later, when the house emptied, I sat alone in the quiet that followed. The kind that comes after something irreversible. Everything had broken. But beneath the wreckage, something else remained. Not relief. Not peace. Just truth. And as the night settled around me, I wondered. After everything shatters, after all the careful pretending is gone, what do we build from what's left? The soup had gone cold before anyone noticed. Steam no longer rose from the bowls, but we kept holding our spoons like warmth might return if we waited long enough. The house was full again. Voices, a step, coats laid across chairs that still remembered other winters. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded in my lap, listening to the hum beneath everything. Not silence, not noise, something tighter, like a wire pulled too far. The light above us flickered once, then steadied. No one mentioned it. That was the thing about that night. We were all pretending the cracks weren't already there. It had been 4 days since the truth stopped being just mine. 4 days of waking up with the same weight on my chest. 4 nights of staring at the ceiling while my husband slept facing the wall. We agreed to dinner because it felt normal. Because families gather when things are wrong. Or maybe because we hoped food could soften what words couldn't. I spent the afternoon cooking like muscle memory would save me. Chopping onions. Stirring broth. Wiping the counter until my hands smelled like lemon and soap. Every task had edges. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. I smoothed my shirt. Fixed my face. My son arrived first. He hugged me with the same arms that once wrapped around my neck when he was small. I breathed him in and felt something in me tighten. Behind him came her. Careful. Quiet. Too careful. She smiled, but not with her eyes. My husband followed last. He didn't touch me. Didn't meet my gaze. He took his seat as if it had been assigned, not chosen. We sat. We served. We passed bread. The clock on the wall kept time for a life that no longer fit. Conversation moved the way it always had. Sideways. Weather. Work. A neighbor's dog. The words filled space but meant nothing. I nodded when expected. Laughed half a second too late. Then it happened. A glance. So small it would have been nothing to anyone else. But I saw it. Her eyes flicked toward my husband. Not long. Just enough. He stiffened. Looked down. Something inside me shifted. My spoon clinked against the bowl. Too loud. I froze, then set it down carefully, like noise itself might break us open. My son was mid-sentence, smiling, talking about plans. Future plans. The kind parents dream of. I watched his mouth move. And suddenly, I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could hear was my own pulse. I thought of the nights I stayed quiet. The mornings I swallowed questions. The way silence had felt safer than truth. But sitting there, watching them share the same air, the same table, silence stopped feeling like protection. Felt like betrayal. Cleared my throat. No one noticed at first. Then I spoke. I need to say something. The room didn't stop right away. Fork scraped. A glass touched the table. Then everything slowed like we were underwater. My son looked at me, confused, concern softening his face. My husband's jaw tightened. I didn't plan this, I said. I told myself I'd wait. I told myself it wasn't the right time. My voice was steady. That surprised me. But there's never a right time to tell the truth when it breaks things. Her hands were folded in her lap, white-knuckled. She didn't look at me. I've been carrying something heavy, I continued. And it's been getting heavier every day. My husband shook his head once. A warning. Or a plea. I didn't stop. There are things happening in this family that shouldn't be happening. The words hung there unfinished. My son frowned. Mom, what are you talking about? I looked at him. Really looked. The boy who trusted me to keep the world safe. I'm so sorry, I said. That was when the room broke. Not with shouting. Not with anger. With stillness. Her breath caught. My husband closed his eyes. And my son understood. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. No, he said. Not loud. Just firm. No. Say it's not true. No one did. Faces fell. Color drained. Something sacred collapsed between us. I didn't want it this way, I whispered. But wanting doesn't change what's already been done. Dinner ended without anyone saying it was over. People drifted away like ghosts, unsure where to land. My son disappeared upstairs. Door closed. Soft but final. I stayed at the table long after the plates were cleared. The soup had formed a skin. The bread was untouched. My husband stood in the doorway for a moment, then turned away. His footsteps faded down the hall. I reached for the vase and noticed the flowers had begun to wilt. One petal fell onto the tablecloth. Then another. I didn't move to stop it. Some things once broken can't be arranged back into place. As the house settled into its new quiet, I sat alone with what remained. Truth, wreckage, and the question I couldn't escape. When everything you built your life on collapses, what do you stand on next? The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the horizon, spilling pale gold across the porch. I sat in the same chair I had avoided for weeks, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that smelled faintly of lavender. The air was cool, the kind that whispers through your bones and makes every breath feel longer than it should. The house behind me was quiet, emptier than it had ever been, yet somehow lighter, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had finally lifted, just a little. I could hear the wind stir the leaves in the maple tree at the edge of the yard. A bird called somewhere, hesitant, as though it too didn't know what had changed. My hands rested on my knees, the skin stretched over thin bones, veins tracing a map of years and memories. I felt each one today. The laughter, the tears, the anger, the nights I couldn't sleep because my mind replayed every betrayal. The quiet pressed against me, but it wasn't the same kind of sharp silence that had haunted the house before. It was softer, forgiving. The kitchen clock ticked somewhere inside, a distant metronome marking time I hadn't been keeping. I remembered mornings when the house had hummed with chatter, with laughter spilling from the living room, with plates clattering, voices raised in joy or irritation. Now there was only space, and in that space, I felt something I hadn't dared to before. Possibility. Could life stretch forward again, even after the cracks had deepened too far? I traced my fingers along the arm of the chair, rough wood under my skin, grounding me. It was the same chair I had first sat in the day I found the truth, the day everything had fallen apart. I remembered gripping its arms like a lifeline, the floor beneath me trembling with disbelief. And now as I sat, I realized it had not moved an inch. It had held me then, held me now. There was a strange comfort in continuity. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of rain from the distant hills. The clouds had gathered slowly, almost imperceptibly, and I welcomed the change. Change was no longer a threat. It was a reminder that life continued, whether I followed it willingly or not. I breathed in a full, slow inhale, and let it out in fragments, like broken promises being returned to the world. Inside, the rooms echoed softly when I passed through them, the hardwood underfoot making a familiar creak. I paused in the hallway, running a hand along the banister. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. I had cleaned here before, almost mechanically, but today, each sweep of the cloth, each polished surface, felt purposeful. I was reclaiming space for myself, marking it as mine without needing anyone else to recognize it. I thought of him, my husband, the man who had broken the trust one hadn't known I relied on until it was gone. He moved quietly in his own spaces now, avoiding eyes that used to meet him with unquestioning warmth. We spoke in measured sentences, conversations weighed down by what had been lost and what could not be repaired in a single gesture. Even in that there was progress. Even in that there was life. My journal sat on the small table by the window. I hadn't touched it in days. I lifted it now, feeling the texture of its leather cover beneath my fingers. Words written months ago spilled into my memory. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. Today I wrote differently. My handwriting was slower, gentler. The sentences did not scream. They whispered. They acknowledged hurt without clinging to it. I wrote of mornings spent on this porch, of wind and leaves, of small joys rediscovered. A single teacup steamed softly beside me. I held it, the warmth seeping into my hands, grounding me further in the present. I remembered days when I had shared tea with someone who no longer belonged in these moments, and a flicker of sadness passed over me. But it did not linger. I let it pass, acknowledging the loss without being swallowed by it. There was room in my chest for sorrow and hope to exist side by side. The clouds thickened and rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. Each drop struck the porch roof with a delicate rhythm, like a new heartbeat echoing against old pain. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it wash over me, listening to the sound fill the empty spaces of the house and the spaces within me. It was cleansing, subtle, not dramatic. It reminded me that endings were not always sudden. They could seep into life gradually, leaving traces of growth in their wake. I thought about my son. He had seen pieces of our unraveling, fragments that had scared him, confused him. I had not rushed to shield him from truth, nor had I dumped it all at once. We had begun small conversations, measured and cautious, learning to navigate this new reality together. The process was painstaking but honest. That, I realized, was enough for now. Enough to plant seeds of understanding, enough to let healing stretch slowly. Evening came, and the light softened further. Shadows pooled in the corners of the porch, but they did not frighten me. I welcomed them. Shadows were honest. They revealed contours, shapes, the passage of time. I sipped my tea again and let my eyes wander over the horizon, past the hills, beyond the small town that had witnessed our unraveling. Somewhere out there the world continued and I could continue with it. The house was quiet, the rooms empty, the air finally still. I rested my hands in my lap and felt the pulse of the day slow in rhythm with my own. There was no sudden catharsis, no dramatic revelation. Only fragments, soft moments of clarity, small steps toward peace. I knew tomorrow would bring its own questions, its own small trials, its own breaths of light. But for now I allowed myself this quiet, this fragment of healing. I looked down at the journal one last time before closing it. The pages were filled with my voice, my reflection, my acceptance. I understood at last that endings were sometimes necessary, even when they ached. The truth, once unbearable, had settled into its place in life, no longer a jagged intrusion but a mark of survival. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of years and experiences in my bones. The porch creaked underfoot, familiar and comforting. Rain continued to fall, steady and persistent, and I welcomed it as I stepped toward the edge of the world I still had yet to reclaim. Life could be rebuilt, one fragment at a time, one measured breath at a time. I did not need all the pieces today. I only needed to keep moving forward. The sun had dipped lower now, leaving a golden haze over everything. I breathed in the rain, the wind, the quiet, and let the fragments of myself settle. Some endings were indeed necessary, and some beginnings waited quietly, just beyond the horizon. She paused at the edge of the porch, rain dripping from the eaves onto the ground, and for the first time in months, allowed herself a slow, tentative smile. The house behind her was empty, but the world ahead was waiting. Fragments of healing, fragments of life, stretching forward in soft, uncertain light.